Welcome to this special FISI UK podcast. I am Vijay Rana. We are commemorating the 150th birth anniversary of Bhagwaan Birsa Munda. We are going to present an insightful conversation with renowned author Tuhin Sinha to honor the life and legacy of Bhagwaan Birsa Munda, the revered freedom fighter, reformer, and a tribal icon. In this program, we will try to explore Birsa Munda's extraordinary struggle for Jangal, and Zameen, his lasting impact on India's tribal identity and national consciousness, some rare historical insights and lesser known stories of his life, and of course, the contemporary relevance of this great hero of India. This is a heartfelt tribute from FISI UK to a hero who continues to inspire generations. To discuss this forgotten hero, we have with us Tuhin Sinha. He is an author and a politician. Currently, he serves as the national spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party, renowned for his nuanced articulation, measured debate, and dignified argumentative style. Tuhin Sinha had been among the most prolific Indian writers with a knack of experimenting with unorthodox genres. Among his recent books, he has authored an ambitious trilogy of India's unsung subaltern heroes and freedom fighters. The Legend of Birsa Munda, The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat, and Sidhu Kanhu. Tuhin's book, Modi's Northeast Story, is a rare anthology of 23 essays that document the transformation of India's northeast states under Prime Minister Modi. His books have traversed a wide range of subjects across both fiction and non-fiction genres. His recent book, Climate Action, documents India's initiatives towards achieving the ambitious net zero carbon emission targets set by Prime Minister Modi. Tuhin has authored 14 books to this date. Tuhin Sinha, welcome to this program. But before we begin this program, let me give you a brief introduction of FISI UK. Founded in 1976, Friends of India Society International is a UK-based organization committed to representing India's voice in the United Kingdom. FISI UK works to strengthen India-UK relations through research, advocacy, and public engagement. It focuses on promoting accurate and positive narratives about India, countering misinformation, and empowering the British Indian community by promoting unity, connection, and the pride in their Indian heritage. Guided by the values of truth, integrity, and cohesion, FISI UK aims to be an authentic diasporic voice of India in the UK. The organization actively pursues this mission through events, publications, and collaborations with key stakeholders in both countries. Now let's start our conversation with Tuhin Sinha. Tuhin, first, before we start the program, let me tell you a brief story how I came across Birsa Munda. The year was 1978, and I was doing my PhD in Allahabad University. And my brother-in-law invited me to Ranchi. And there, I think it was either Firailal Chowk or the railway station where I saw a statue of Birsa Munda. And I immediately asked him, who is this man whose statue was just in front of us? He had no answer. Then I went to where he was staying and met several of his friends who were not from Jharkhand area. And I asked them who was Birsa Munda, and none of them could tell me. A week later, I came back to Allahabad and I asked several people there, who was Birsa Munda and what did he do for India? Nobody answered me. And then I went to library and found a small book of about 40 pages, and then I came to know that he was a great tribal hero who launched a struggle against the British authority. So that was the level of awareness about Birsa Munda in the 70s. Has the situation changed now?
Well, good evening, Vijayji. Great to be on FISI UK podcast to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Bhagwaan Birsa Munda. Yes, absolutely. Things have changed in the last 11 years. Our history, had a certain colonial mindset with which we approached our history. In fact, history has always been written from the point of view of kings. And that is the reason why our subaltern freedom movement never got its due in our history books. So let me break this myth. Our freedom movement, our freedom movement did not start with the 1857 revolution. It did not start with the formation of the Congress Party in 1885. In fact, it goes back to 1765 when the first documented story of a subaltern revolution has been inked. The freedom fighter was Raghunath Mahato, who led a revolt in the present day area of Purulia. This was followed by another big revolt by Tilka Majhi in the area of present day Bhagalpur around 1783. And thereafter, right through the 19th century, several revolts were taking place which went largely unreported. This was a parallel freedom movement which never got its due. Thankfully, after Prime Minister Modi became Prime Minister, he started talking about the sacrifice of our tribal heroes. And that is when, a lot of these heroes who were never talked about, who were never written about, finally research was undertaken to find out more about them. In fact, when I was growing up in Jamshedpur also has a Birsa Nagar. Jamshedpur also has, two or three Birsa statues. But when I would be curious to find out about these characters, about these heroes, there would be complete dearth of information about them. And whatever information existed was largely by way of hearsay. There was no concrete story around these heroes. So around 2019-20, by when I was entrenched in a political career after being a successful author, I was somewhere, on the cusp of a important role in politics, and my writing activity or my writing assignments had been receding because of my increasing involvement in politics. I was looking for that one big subject I could, concentrate on for the next 2 years or so. And I believe that what is most universal is something that is most personal to you. So I started, you know, identifying all of those moments, all of those heroes I was acquainted with at the time of growing up. And I remember those days when we would go back from our school, which is Loyola School in Jamshedpur, to our colony. My father used to work in Tata Motors. We had Telco Colony. So there were a couple of chalks which had Birsa statues. Like I said, I would be curious to find out about these characters, but there was very little information. So I remember those days. I thought this is the heroic character about whom I would like to research and I would like to write for the next couple of years. And thankfully, it was a blessing in disguise, even though COVID was a tragedy for the world and for a tragedy for India. The initial months, the 3 or 4 months when there was complete lockdown, that gave me some breathing space to set my priorities, writing priorities right once again. And with the help of my co-author on the subject, Ankita Verma, we managed to get the first draft out in about 8 months. And then the second draft took another 1 year because the challenge with these characters, with these heroes, is that while they were alive, there was barely anything written about them. Their stories have been visited in hindsight, much after their death. For example, in the case of Birsa Munda died in 1900. Very mysterious death. It is believed that the Britishers poisoned him. Now, 1908 is when the Chota Nagpur Land Tenancy Act was enacted, which gave powers to certain powers to the landless Adivasis who were hitherto, who were previously denied those powers, who were previously, you know, oppressed and denied those powers. Now, there is a theory that Father Hoffman, Father Hoffman was the predatory missionary against whom Birsa Munda primarily fought against proselytization. But there is also a theory that it was Father Hoffman who, after Birsa Munda's death, was instrumental in convincing the British bosses that if you don't come up with certain reforms in favor of the Adivasis, in favor of the tribals, then there could be another revolt. And that is when the Britishers started mulling over certain reforms, which eventually led to the Chota Nagpur Land Tenancy Act in 1908. So it was only in hindsight, much after their deaths, whether it is Birsa Munda, whether it is Siddhu Kano, whether it was Tilka Machi, most of these stories, most of the details of their sacrifice were discovered post their death. And that makes these stories far more challenging to write and to put forth in a palatable form so that the youngsters can, assimilate information and draw the right takeaways from their lives.
Let's go back into the times when Birsa Munda was born. What was the life in Chota Nagpur area, that's present-day Jharkhand, in 1875 when he was born on 15th of November? So what was the life of a tribal person in that time frame?
Well, abject despondency and complete lack of amenities, basic amenities, massive oppression is what defined the life of a tribal. Birsa Munda ji was born at Ulihatu, which is roughly 60 kilometers away from present-day Ranchi. In fact, I visited that village after writing the book on 15th August 2023 because I wanted to celebrate the Independence Day with the descendants, um, with the Adivasis of that village where Birsa Munda ji was born. And in fact, there are some very nice pictures which I would share with you. I distributed the Hindi edition of my book to about 200 villagers. Now, the subaltern freedom movement was far more complicated, far more layered than the mainstream freedom movement which we have known through our history books.
The Congress.
And the reason is, there were two issues which were primarily at play in the subaltern areas, in the tribal areas in those years. The tribals were not directly fighting with the Britishers. It was a layered fight. The primary fight of the tribals was against oppressive landlords who had begun to act as mercenaries and agents and stooges of the Britishers, of the British administrators in towns and cities. So in a way, financial subjugation, when I talk about British oppression in subaltern areas, it was a twofold pattern of oppression. One was financial subjugation through mercenary landowners. Around 1850, the Britishers realized that financial subjugation was not sufficient. It was not, they were perhaps too sadistic, or they were perhaps too diabolic, too monstrous in their designs. They decided that financial subjugation was not sufficient. And they decided to also go in for a parallel cultural subjugation. So as a well-devised plan, they started settling in foreign missionaries in and around Ranchi around 1850. So the first lot of German missionaries were brought to Ranchi around 18 in the early 1850s. Now they were given specific targets that you need to convert these many tribals to Christianity every month, or these many tribals to Christianity every year. This twofold oppression, simultaneous twofold oppression via financial subjugation, where the culprit, the villain, was the Indian landlords, and the cultural subjugation subsequently, where proselytization was happening via some very cunning fathers, priests, made the tribal freedom struggle far more complicated, because the primary culprits or the primary fight of our tribals was against landlords on the one hand, and against the predatory priests on the other. It was only after fighting them that they would realize, if they reached a certain level, they would realize that the main enemies are lying far off in the cities, in Ranchi, in the headquarters. Kolkata used to be the capital of in those days, and the entire Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, all of these places were under the Bengal province. So it was only after it was only after achieving the third or fourth level in their fight they would realize that the main villain who's propagating all of these oppressive activities is far, far away, ensconced in the comfort of his palace in Kolkata, or in the district headquarters in Ranchi, and it was very difficult or next to impossible for them to reach there. So this made the tribal, struggle almost hopeless. It was a battle which was terribly, where the odds were terribly against them. So in this situation, roughly these were the conditions prevailing in 1875 when Birsa Munda was born. His parents
Yeah,
were
let's come to his early life. What do we know about his early life, about his
his
family, his
parents
parents?
were landless laborers. His parents were landless laborers who would shift almost every 6 months to a new location. So there are many different villages in that part where he has lived his early life. In fact, he spent a good amount of time in another village called Champa with his Masi, with his maternal aunt. And like I mentioned, like most Adivasi families in those years, a point came when the family was confronted with with a very pointed dilemma. Either they had to convert to improve their financial situation, or they had to continue to suffer. And Birsa Munda's parents took a very practical, a very pragmatic call. They felt it is important for Birsa Munda to imbibe better education. Of course, there was a precondition for that. He had to be baptized. So around 11 years of age, he was a sharp child. But like I said, not factual details are not there. He was a sharp child who was um, the teachers were very fond of. And that is one of the reasons why one of the teachers very strongly suggested to his parents that he needs to be sent to a school, a Baptist school, which was about 105 kilometers away from his village in Chaibasa. So his parents were confronted with a massive dilemma. Should we convert? Because that is the only way he can prolong his education. And they finally took a practical, a calibrated call. They felt it is important for him to imbibe, better education. So he was baptized. He was sent to a missionary school, the best in that region, in Chaibasa. Now, given the roads, I have seen the
And this
topography
and
of.
this Charbas High School was a German school where he got baptized. Is that so?
Yeah, it was a missionary school. It was a missionary school set up by Germans at that point of time. Now, I have seen the topography of that region, so my sense is that it must have taken him, in those days to travel those 105 kilometers must have taken him at least 5 days one way. And that area is full of jungles, so that was a very brave decision on the part of his parents. Now, you can compare the situation to a present day student who gets scholarship in Delhi and goes all the way to study in UK or to USA. So imagine the kind of hopes that the villagers had from Birsa Munda once he would complete his education and come back to the village. But unfortunately, life took a different turn. Now, Birsa Munda was he was a very sharp student. He was fine with missionary education. He was fine with reading the Bible. But over a period of time, he started feeling insulted. He started feeling that the entire purpose, the entire approach of these missionaries was to belittle the Adivasi culture, was to belittle the tribal culture. And at one point of time in 1890, his patience gave way. Um, Now, these are, like broad pointers which we know of, broad timelines. Of course, in my book, because I have written it as a novel, I have dramatized the whole situation. Because I'm sure there were certain incidents that were leading up to this turmoil within him, the exact details of which we are not privy to. But I have weaved in a story around the place where he was studying, where one of the staff members, a cleaner in the school, who had converted to Christianity recently, when he passes away at in old age, his family members are pressurized to perform the last rites as per Christian traditions. Whereas that person who died was very keen that the last rite should be performed as a Hindu, because the conversion had barely taken a few years ago. Now, this became a point of contention because Birsa Munda felt outraged. He felt, that the missionaries were controlling the Adivasis completely. And a situation arose where he really snapped at one of the teachers in the college, leading to a point where he was rusticated immediately. So when he was 15 in 1890, just when the villagers had high hopes from him, he returned back to the village as a complete loser. And the way people started seeing him changed overnight. From a potential winner, people would see him as a rank loser who gave it all, who couldn't cope with the situation, and they would make fun of him. Now, in this situation, Birsa Munda felt very hopeless and there were a couple of other incidents where he felt where he felt completely alienated within the family, as also in the village, where people would mock him, people would look down upon him, and he also had anger issues because he was not a normal child. He wanted to fight the oppressive system, and after a certain incident, he just disappeared from that entire village. This was again barely a few months after he returned to his village in 1890. Now, for 4 years, till 1894, nobody knew where he was. But in hindsight, when he came back, based on what he narrated to his followers, we know that he met a priest called Anand Panrai. A priest, as in a Hindu priest, who was well versed with the Vedas, who was well versed with Ramayana and Mahabharata and the scriptures. He met Anand Panrai in one of the jungles, and Anand Panrai was also very proficient in herbal healing. In the sense, he was, very well versed with certain herbs that could cure chronic diseases in patients. So Birsa Munda apparently spent a good 3.5 years with Anand Panrai learning many of those skills.
And
Then 1890,
he's still about 15 years old, or 15 to 17 years old. Is that,
so he was around 15 when he was rusticated from the school. He came back within a few months. He again went into hibernation. Nobody knew where he goes. So from 16 to apparently 19 years of age, he returned in 1894 to his village. From 16 to 19 is when he inherited this Vedic knowledge, this knowledge about Hindu scriptures from Anand Panrai. And then he came back to his village in 1894. Now, obviously the villagers were not well educated. They were superstitious. So one doesn't know the truth behind it, but there is a very interesting story. One doesn't know the exact truth behind it, but there is a very interesting story about the day he came back to the village. He was in a completely different avatar, very long hair, um, almost like a sage with a bow and arrow. And that is supposed to be a day with inclement weather, when there was storm, there were winds. Now, when a few people first saw him, they were shocked, because in his new avatar as a sage, as with long hair, and with lightning and storm all around, they somehow felt there was lightning from his eyes. So like I said, there are very interesting stories when you go to the hinterlands. It could be unflinching faith of his followers or something else. But this is a theory which has prevailed, and which has also been captured in different books.
so these stories are still, they survive in the public memory of the local people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Very
In
interesting.
fact, one of his direct descendants passed away last year. So in fact, they also narrated similar stories about him.
So
So this is
this is quite extraordinary that somebody who has lived a very, very kind of a poor and deprived life has so much pride in his roots that he's prepared to stand up against a very oppressive and very powerful system.
absolutely.
This is wonderful. And the saddest part, which haunts me again and again, is that we all forgot about him. I cannot get over this feeling that how
Yeah.
we forget this. Now, so he's building up, and he's creating situations, and he's gearing up to take on the system. What was the big moment when he decided, okay, let's go on and mobilize our people and fight this oppressive machine?
So again, there are a few more phases before he actually took on the armed struggle. Now, when he returns, his primary aim was to reform the Adivasi society, bring them out of the clutches of superstition, of regressiveness, which he felt had confined them. So, he started off as a healer, he started off as a preacher. In fact, he insisted on certain reforms in the Adivasi society. And surprisingly, many of those reforms were of a very sattvic, Sanatan nature. For example, he asked them to give up, non-vegetarian food on certain days. He asked them to wear white, live a life of simplicity. All of these reforms, and obviously he became a very vocal voice against proselytization, because most of his teachings would give anecdotes and examples from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So look at the complete, time coming a full circle. Between 1896 to 1890, he was imbibing the Bible, he was imbibing missionary education, 1894, he returns as a preacher of Hindu philosophy, as a preacher who was talking about the Sanatan Dharma, about Sattvic practices, who was trying to bring the Adivasis out of the clutches of, the regressiveness which the Britishers were preying upon. Now, the Britishers now at this point of time, a political revolution was nowhere in his mind. But the Britishers became so suspicious of his activities, the reason being that, his fan following, his following grew by leaps and bounds in just a few months. So by 1895, there were thousands of people who would flock from places as far as 100 kilometers away just to hear him speak, just to listen to him. And his village would be like a pilgrim center. Now the villagers, aided by a few of his rivals within the community, the Britishers planted this theory that he is conspiring against the Britishers. He's planning an armed revolution, which was not the truth at that point of time. And in 1895, he was arrested on false charges. In 1896, he was implicated in those false charges and kept in jail till about the end of 1897. He released from jail, in fact, on 38, he was released from jail after a good 2 years on 30th November 1897. Now, till then, a political revolution or an armed revolution was nowhere on his mind. He just wanted reforms, he just wanted to organize, the Adivasi society, instill cultural pride in them, mobilize them, unite them. Now, those were the times when every second or third year would be either a drought year, a famine year, or an epidemic year that would kill thousands of people. So 1897 was one of those years, 1896-97 was one of those years where thousands of people were killed due to an epidemic coupled with the, drought. This included some of, the relatives of Birsa Munda, people close to him. So on the day when he was released from Hazaribagh jail on 30th November 1897, some of his close associates came to meet him. They were very disturbed by the tragedies which had befallen upon the community. And the first thing they told him is that now we need to change our tack. The Britishers will not heed to anything. They will not bow to anything but an armed struggle. Now, when Birsa Munda saw the plight of the villagers, and when they repeatedly convinced him about an armed revolution, he finally changed tack and he decided that armed revolution is the way ahead. So from end of 1897 till end of 1899, he organized a private army, and that was, imagine the Herculean task, the challenge that it would have been, the humongous challenge it would have been, considering that he was constantly under the watch of the law enforcing agencies. They knew that, his following is such, and since there were voices of dissent among community members, there was a possibility of him taking up the path of dissent. He very discreetly organized a private army, and on the eve of Christmas in 1899, they unleashed their first attack, which was in a place called Bundu, which is about 35 kilometers away from Ranchi. They attacked a church, they attacked one of the administrative offices in that place. And subsequently, this armed revolution went on for about two weeks. It finally culminated in a crossfire. As in, the Adivasis were fighting. The Adivasis had planted themselves. They were hiding in a place called Dumbari Buru, which is a hilly area, again, some 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers away from Ranchi. And the Britishers converged on that area from below and they were moving up. Now, obviously, there was an element of treachery over here. The Britishers, British forces outnumbered the Adivasis who were on Birsa Munda's side, and they were also deceived into believing that if they gave up arms, they would be given a safe passage. But that was not to be. So most of his members of Birsa Munda's army were either killed or captured. Birsa Munda managed to escape. He
Do we know
spent,
how many people were fighting on his side, and how many people were killed
there
in?
are rough accounts of about 250, 300 people.
Okay.
So he managed to escape and he was planning to remobilize a force to deal with the Britishers. But 1 month down the line, around the first week of February, he was captured. Again, he had made a small hut for himself on a hill and was staying along with one acquaintance over there. He was planning to recoup and get the forces back, but he was arrested over there. It is said that one of his associates actually deceived him for money and gave information of his hideout. So he was arrested in February first week 2000, and it is said that when he was brought into Ranchi saw a rare visual of streets being there were people on both sides of the roads waiting to acknowledge the bravado of Birsa Munda. They were celebrating his bravado. So he was brought in like a king captured by the enemy. He spent about 3 months in jail. He was convicted. And in the first week of June, he passed away on June 9th.
Yeah.
It is believed that his food was poisoned. He died a slow death over 3 to 4 days when he started feeling weak. And, on the 9th of June, he just passed away.
And what was the official reason given for his death?
Well, it's a bit like Lal Bahadur Shastri's death. So nobody knows the real reason, but his associates believe that his food was poisoned because over a period of 3 to 4 days, they could feel he was enervated. There was complete lack of energy. He was feeling low. His movement was sluggish. And, he didn't wake up on the 9th of June, 2000.
Now tell me, when he was first released from the jail, he was, people started calling him Dharti Aba. How his legend at that time grew, and how people of those times saw him as their own hero and deliverer. So, what kind of public appeal he had among his followers, and how loyal was his followers? Because you said there was some element of treachery and divisions. So was his community fully behind him, or there were, some schism or some differences within the community that we
No,
should?
Dharti, the title of Dharti Aba was given to him way back in 1895, when
Okay.
villagers would flock from more than 100 kilometers away just to listen to him, just to devote their time and attention to his teachings. But of course, his meteoric rise had also led to jealousy, and one needs to acknowledge that certain groups within the Adivasi community were vulnerable to mercenary influences. So either out of a sense of jealousy or due to mercenary influences, there was a small section, there were a few people within the community who were conspiring against him, which is a fact which has been documented. Even the way he was caught in 2000, in 1900. If one of his associates had not revealed the plan, had not provided details about his hideout, he may have escaped and he may have fought back harder.
Yeah, that has been the story throughout our history, that there was always, people who betrayed their country and their cause. Yeah. Now, coming to his, after his death, how he was remembered. Say he died in 1900, and after that, how his legend survived in the public memory. Say in the 1920s, when the Congress movement was happening, were there people remembering him at that time, or did he leave a public memory?
Well, unfortunately, the Congress party has appropriated the freedom struggle for itself. So, in fact, when the Congress party, the present day Congress party, is so condescending even towards Veer Savarkar, imagine how condescending they would have been towards tribal heroes. In fact, one of the reasons why my book is more relevant today is also because I have an active political role, and today in the political narrative, I feel it is important to talk about our tribal freedom fighters more and more because the Congress party carries a sense of entitlement. They believe that the freedom movement, is the domain of Congress party, which was formed in 1885, which is not the truth. A parallel freedom movement has existed, like I said, from 1865, which needs to be documented. So, for most part of the 20th century, Birsa Munda existed only in a symbolic form. Like you mentioned, there was a statue in Ranchi. There's a large statue, and there are a couple of small statues in Ranchi. The same applies to other places like Dhanbad or Jamshedpur, Chaibasa. The airport in Ranchi is named after Birsa Munda. But despite these symbolic, you know, this symbolic placement of Birsa Munda, there was very little attempt to actually get into his life to make his own community aware of his sacrifice. And that is something which has consciously happened in the last 11 years. So, in fact, even our NCRT books today have a chapter on his sacrifice. And maybe had we been more accommodating towards our tribal heroes post 1947, I'm sure he would have been considered for the Bharat Ratna at some point of time. Today, of course, when we celebrate 150 years of his birth anniversary, um, there is an attempt to give him the recognition that was long denied to him.
Now, how do you see the current situation? Because his struggle against the colonial powers started on the issue of conversion, and he had so much pride in his roots and culture. But today in Jharkhand, which is being one of the major areas where the missionaries are active and conversion was happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even today. So, how his followers see the missionary activities today?
Well, to be honest, when I went to his village, I was shocked to see that almost 95% of the villagers are converted to Christianity. And most of them are not aware of their pedigree. Most of them are not aware of his contribution to India's freedom struggle. And in fact, our constant effort has been to change this. Unfortunately, during COVID, Hemant Soren was attending one of the conferences at Harvard University through a Zoom meeting, through an online meeting, and he had made a very controversial remark that Adivasis are never Hindus, will never be.
Yeah.
I had confronted that with a very exhaustive point by point rebuttal, which was published in the print, Shekhar Gupta's The Print. So I think such fake narratives need to be rebutted, need to be confronted, because those who claim to be the ideological descendants of Birsa Munda, people like Hemant Soren, they are the people who are actively promoting the conversion lobby in the state. And I think it's important and that is why, we have constantly been highlighting the sacrifice of Birsa Munda and his efforts to combat proselytization. In fact, if you read my book, his primary fight was against Father Hoffman, the very treacherous, the very cunning, uh, predatory missionary who had gone on an overdrive trying to convert the maximum number of villagers into Christianity. So, yes, I mean, the whole attitude of certain politicians who have been encouraging the conversion lobby is a cause of concern. But that has always been a problem. Jayachans have always been a problem in India. We have dealt with them in the past and we will deal with them in the future.
Interesting. Now, Prime Minister Modi, gave a big push to this idea of tribal memory and tribal pride, and bringing them back to their roots, and making the rest of the country aware of the contribution of the tribal communities. How do you see the tribal awakening today?
Well, tribal awakening has happened in many different forms. One of the reasons for the Naxal movement was a sense of alienation among the tribal community, which was encouraged by certain political groups inimical to India's larger interests. Today, one of the biggest successes of the present government in tribal areas has been the near elimination of Naxalism. So, if Naxalism was prevalent in about 100 districts in 2014, that has been brought down to about 9 to 10 districts today, and by 31st March 2026, we have set a very clear target of Naxal Mukt Bharat. Now, Naxal Mukt Bharat will have a huge economic impact in the districts which were hitherto impacted by the Naxal movement. For example, if Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, which was a hub of Naxal activities until a few years ago, is going to have one of the largest steel plants, a 10,000 crore steel plant is being set up, which should be functional in the next few years. If biofuel production is being encouraged on a large scale in the districts of Bastar, the economic activities which these districts, which were until now impacted by Naxal violence, is witnessing will give a boost to our overall economy. I was doing some data crunching the other day, and it is estimated that the economic activities which are being undertaken in the Naxal impacted areas is bound to lead to a 0.3 to 0.5% incremental increase, additional increase in our GDP in the coming years. So, yes, all of these activities, all of these initiatives will ultimately improve the life of our tribals across the country. Plus, a whole range of social welfare schemes of the government, whether it is Swachh Bharat Mission, whether it is Nal Se Jal Yojana, whether it is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, a very significant chunk of the beneficiaries belong to the tribal communities. The ease of living has improved exponentially in tribal areas. When we talk about the aspirational district programs, which was launched in 2018, wherein 118 backward-most districts were focused upon, and the rise in GDP in those selected districts is quite significant. All of these things have led to improvement in the lives of our tribals, and that process is an ongoing process.
What do you think about the process what do you think about the process of modernization of these communities? Because if they have to, travel together in this great national journey, certain amount of development has to happen. The roads have to be built, the infrastructure has to be built,
That is
and
precisely what is happening.
that will certainly disturb the tribal way of life. And a lot of people say, no, that way should be protected and no development should take place. So where do you stand, and how can we find a meeting ground between these two approaches?
Sir, I think you, being in UK, you may not be aware of what's exactly happening on the ground, because the pace at which infrastructure creation has happened across the country, the pace at which rural roads are being constructed, today Adivasis are a part of the mainstream. all of these notions that their lives would be disturbed, all of these are notions which were deliberately encouraged to keep them backward, which were deliberately encouraged to deprive them of the benefits of progress. That Congress mentality, that left mentality has been decimated in the last 11 years. Today, if you travel to, the villages of Bastar, you will find top-notch 5G connectivity. You will find seamless internet connectivity across the Bastar region, or for that matter, even in the easternmost border of Arunachal Pradesh, which again is a tribal zone. Our tribal zone is not restricted to Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh. Most of the northeastern states have a very heavy tribal population. And if you travel to the northeastern states with 5 lakh crore of capital expenditure in the last 11 years, again that has led to a huge increase in the lives of tribals in those areas.
Very interesting. Now, coming back to our hero of the day, Birsa Munda, how can young generation remember him today, and what is the best form of his memory?
Well, Birsa Munda's life has many, many teachings. Like I narrated his life story. In a short span of 25 years, the number of evolutions which his life witnessed, for a normal human being, you witness that many evolutions in a lifespan of 70 years. Birsa Munda experienced that in a short span of 25 years. So you can imagine how quickly he evolved into a different human being, how quickly he changed his life according to challenges, according to the circumstances. I do feel at some point of time, management institutions should do more research on his life, and there could be a possibility of introducing a course curriculum, especially in areas like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, where management institutions develop a course curriculum around the managerial teachings or the management techniques of Birsa Munda's revolution, or the management techniques of his reforms. I think that would make his teachings more accessible to the common man, to every student across the country. But yes, having said that, in the last few years, any which way, the level of awareness which has been built up around him. I remember when I first shared the cover of my book on Birsa Munda around 5 years ago. That was early 2021, which is almost 5 years ago. Some people asked me, they were completely unaware of him, and people living in metros, working in the corporate world, they were completely unaware of him. Today, the level of awareness which exists around him is significantly higher. So Birsa Munda is a growing brand, I would say. 150 years down the line, 150 years after he was born. Very interestingly, he's a growing brand where, apart from tribals today, people across the globe, not just in India, you sitting in UK are inquisitive to find out more about Birsa Munda. And I'm sure at some point of time we will have conclaves and conventions around his life teachings in foreign universities also. So it's a process, and I'm glad that process has been initiated in a very robust manner by Prime Minister Modi that will only, escalate from here.
Tuhin Sinha, thank you very much indeed for enlightening
My
us
pleasure, my
in
pleasure
UK.
and my honor. It is always very energizing for me to speak on Birsa Munda because his life is actually very inspiring, and it just makes us aware of the fact that nothing is impossible if you want to achieve something.
Of course, and I think he should be classed in parallel to somebody like Bhagat Singh, and that sort of hero. Sadly, we
Absolutely.
all forgot about him. But thank you for reviving the memory of this great Indian hero. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.